They say everything is bigger in Texas. Farms, skies, pride. But what they don't tell you is that the darkness is deeper here, too. Beneath the scorching sun and endless horizons, there are places where light cannot reach. Places where something ancient still waits. Tonight, I'm taking you to the heart of the Lone Star State, to a place where 3 people discovered that some secrets must remain buried in Texas soil. These aren't legends. They aren't folklore. These are stories of real people in real places. And what they experienced will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. Turn off the lights, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't watch this alone, because after tonight, you'll never look at Texas the same way again. Before you begin, if you're brave enough to listen to all 3 stories, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Get ready. Story 1. The Thing in the Oil Field. The summer of 2019 was particularly brutal in West Texas. The kind of heat that turns your truck into an oven and makes the asphalt shimmer like water in the distance. Marcus Webb had been working the oil fields outside Midland for 6 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the job had to offer. The long nights, the isolation, the mechanical failures that could turn deadly in seconds. But nothing in his training manual prepared him for what he'd encounter on August 23rd. Marcus was assigned to the night shift at Site 47, a drilling operation about 40 miles from the nearest town. The site was so remote that cell service was non-existent, and the only communication was through the company radio. He didn't mind. The solitude paid well, and Marcus had always been comfortable with his own company. That night, he arrived at sunset, watching the sky turn blood red as he pulled up to the site in his pickup. The rig towered above him, a skeletal structure of metal and machinery that groaned and clanked with rhythmic precision. His job was simple: monitor the pressure gauges, check the equipment every hour, and radio in if anything seemed off. The previous shift worker, a guy named Dale, looked exhausted as he gathered his things. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, noticing the dark circles under Dale's eyes. Dale paused at his truck door, staring back at the rig. "Yeah, just keep your radio on. And Marcus, don't go near the old storage tanks on the east side. They're scheduled for demolition, but something's been messing around there at night." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Dale was in his truck and gone, leaving nothing but dust and questions behind. Marcus shrugged it off. Probably coyotes or wild hogs. They were common enough out here. The first few hours passed uneventfully. Marcus made his rounds, checked the gauges, and settled into the routine. Around midnight, he was in the control trailer, filling out paperwork, when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the mechanical rhythm of the rig or the whistle of wind through the derrick. This was something else, a scraping sound, metal on metal, coming from the direction of the old storage tanks. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The August night was still hot, and the air smelled of crude oil and dust. He swept his beam across the facility, but everything looked normal. The scraping had stopped. He was about to head back inside when he saw something. One of the old tank doors was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. He was certain it had been closed earlier. Every instinct told him to radio the main office, but what would he say? That a door was open? They'd think he was paranoid. Besides, Dale's warning echoed in his mind. Maybe animals had gotten inside. He'd just close the door and be done with it. As Marcus approached the tank, his flashlight beam caught something that made him stop cold. There were marks on the door, deep gouges in the metal, running vertically from top to bottom. They were fresh too, the exposed metal still bright. But these weren't tool marks or rust damage. They looked like claw marks, each groove about 3 inches wide and perfectly parallel to the others.
The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Whatever made those marks had to be big, really big. Marcus aimed his light into the darkness of the open tank, and his breath caught in his throat. There was something in there, something that shouldn't be. At first, he thought it was an oil spill. A dark mass pooled on the floor of the tank. But then it moved. Not like liquid, but like something alive. The mass shifted, and Marcus could make out a shape. It was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. And it was looking at him. He couldn't see eyes, but he felt its gaze, a cold, alien intelligence that made him feel like prey. The thing began to unfold itself, rising to its full height. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in something that glistened black in the flashlight beam. Not skin. Not exactly. It looked more like the thing was made of the oil itself, constantly dripping and reforming. Marcus stumbled backward, his flashlight beam shaking. The creature moved forward with a wet, sliding sound. As it emerged from the tank, Marcus saw its face, or what passed for one. A smooth, featureless oval with a mouth that split impossibly wide, revealing rows of something that looked like broken drill bits. He ran. Pure survival instinct took over as he sprinted back toward the control trailer. Behind him, he could hear that scraping sound again, but faster now, rhythmic and purposeful. The thing was chasing him. Marcus's lungs burned as he pushed himself harder than he ever had. The trailer was 50 yards away, 40, 30. He could feel it behind him, could hear a wet breathing sound that made his skin crawl. 20 yards, 10. Marcus grabbed the trailer door handle and threw himself inside, slamming it shut behind him. He locked it and backed away, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. For a long moment there was silence. Then came the scraping, right against the door. Slow, deliberate, like the thing was testing the barrier. Marcus grabbed the radio with shaking hands and called for help, any help, but all he got was static. The thing outside began to circle the trailer. He could track its movement by the scraping sound against the metal walls. This went on for what felt like hours. Marcus huddled in a corner, listening to that terrible scraping, occasionally catching glimpses of something black sliding past the windows. He kept the lights off, praying the thing would lose interest and leave. Just before dawn, the scraping finally stopped. Marcus waited another 30 minutes before he dared to look outside. The creature was gone. In the early morning light, he could see its trail, a thick, oily residue leading back to the storage tanks and then disappearing. When the day shift arrived, Marcus quit on the spot. The company tried to convince him to stay, even offered him a raise, but he refused. He did tell his supervisor about the claw marks on the tank door, though. The supervisor went to look and came back pale. The marks were there, just as Marcus described, but there was something else. Inside the tank, they found the remains of Dale, the worker from the previous shift, or what was left of him. His body had been completely drained of blood and other fluids, leaving nothing but a dried husk. The official report blamed it on exposure to chemical agents, but the workers knew better. Site 47 was shut down a week later for equipment failure. The old storage tanks were demolished, and the whole area was paved over with concrete. Marcus moved back east, taking a job in an office where the most dangerous thing was a paper cut. But sometimes, on hot summer nights, he still wakes up to the sound of scraping metal and remembers the thing that shouldn't exist, still waiting somewhere in the Texas darkness.
If this story got your heart racing, wait until you hear what happened next. Make sure you're subscribed because story number 2 will make this one look tame. Story 2: The Midnight Caller of Austin. Sarah Chen moved to Austin in the fall of 2020, drawn by the city's reputation for tech jobs and live music. She found a charming apartment in an older building in East Austin, the kind of place with hardwood floors and high ceilings that made her feel like she was finally making it as an adult. The rent was surprisingly affordable, which should have been her first warning sign in a city where housing prices were skyrocketing. Her neighbors were quiet, mostly young professionals like herself, and the landlord was a sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who'd owned the building for 40 years. Everything seemed perfect. For the first 2 weeks, Sarah settled into her new life, unpacking boxes and exploring her new neighborhood.
Then the phone call started. It began on a Tuesday night at exactly 12:47 a.m. Sarah was jolted awake by her cell phone ringing on the nightstand. Groggy and disoriented, she grabbed it and checked the screen. Unknown number. She declined the call and tried to go back to sleep. But a minute later, it rang again. Same unknown number. This time she answered, ready to tell off whoever was prank calling her. "Hello?" she said, her voice sharp with irritation. Silence. Not the silence of a deadline, but the silence of someone on the other end, listening. Sarah could hear faint breathing, steady and deliberate. "Who is this?" she demanded. Still nothing. Then, just as she was about to hang up, a voice came through. It was barely a whisper, so soft that Sarah had to press the phone hard against her ear to hear it. "Room 7. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her annoyance giving way to unease. Room 7? Her apartment was number 2B. She checked her door number to be sure, but yes, definitely 2B. Probably a wrong number, she told herself, though something about that whispered voice made her skin prickle. She blocked the number and went back to sleep. The next night, it happened again, 12:47 a.m. Exactly. Different number this time, but the same whispered words, room 7. Sarah blocked that number too. On the third night, she didn't answer, but the voicemail made her blood run cold. That same whisper, but this time with more words. Room 7. She's still here, waiting. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, she went down to the first floor where Mrs. Kowalski lived. The old woman invited her in for tea, and Sarah explained the strange calls. Mrs. Kowalski's face went pale. Her teacup rattled as she set it down. Room 7, she repeated quietly. Oh dear. I'd hoped that was finished. What do you mean? Is there a room 7 in this building? The landlord nodded slowly. There was, 40 years ago, before I bought the building and converted it to apartments. This used to be a boarding house. Room 7 was on your floor, at the end of the hall where the storage closet is now. Sarah waited, sensing there was more to the story. A young woman lived there in 1979. Her name was Rebecca Hartley. She was attending UT, studying psychology. Sweet girl, always paid her rent on time. But she was being stalked by someone. She told the other residents about it, said a man had been following her, calling her at all hours. One night in October, she called the police, terrified, said someone was in the building, that she could hear them outside her door. Mrs. Kowalski's hands trembled as she picked up her tea again. The police came, but they didn't find anyone. Told her she was probably imagining things, stressed from school. That was the last time anyone saw Rebecca alive. 3 days later, another resident noticed a smell coming from room 7. When they opened the door... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Sarah felt sick.
They never caught who did it, Mrs. Kowalski said softly. The official investigation went nowhere. But the other residents, they started reporting strange things. Phone calls in the middle of the night, always the same time, 12:47 a.m. That was when the police estimated when it happened. The calls always mentioned room 7. After a few months, people started moving out. I bought the building cheap because of its history and renovated it completely. Sealed up room 7, turned it into storage. The calls stopped for decades. But every now and then, someone reports them again. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. What do the calls want? I don't know, Mrs. Kowalski admitted. But everyone who's gotten them says the same thing. The voice is always asking them to check room 7. And Sarah, nobody who's opened that storage closet at night has ever been the same. That should have been when Sarah moved out. Any sensible person would have packed their bags immediately. But Sarah was stubborn, and she'd just signed a year lease. Besides, she told herself, it was just coincidence. Someone was pranking her. Probably another tenant who knew the building's history. But the calls kept coming. Every night at 12:47 a.m., different numbers, always the same whispered message. Room 7. Check room 7. She needs help. Sarah stopped sleeping. She'd lie awake watching the clock tick toward 12:47, her phone clutched in her hand. She started researching Rebecca Hartley, finding old newspaper articles about the murder. The case was brutal, and the details were worse than what Mrs. Kowalski had let on. 2 weeks after the calls started, Sarah made a decision. She was going to open the storage closet. If there was something there, some explanation for all of this, she needed to know. At 12:30 a.m., armed with a flashlight and the key Mrs. Kowalski had reluctantly given her, Sarah stood in the hallway outside the storage closet. Her hands shook as she inserted the key. The lock was old and stiff, but it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a small space filled with boxes and old furniture. Nothing supernatural, nothing scary. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It was just a closet. Then her phone rang. 12:47, exactly. She answered it without thinking. "Room 7," came the whisper. But this time the voice was different, desperate, terrified. "Behind the wall, please! He put me behind the wall!" Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the closet and stopped on the back wall. There was something off about it. The drywall looked newer than the rest, hastily painted. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. Using her flashlight, she tapped on the wall. It sounded hollow. She should have called the police right then, but something compelled her forward. Using a screwdriver from the toolbox in the closet, Sarah began to pry at the drywall. It came away easily, too easily, revealing a dark space behind it. The smell that hit her was overwhelming, old and musty and wrong. Her flashlight beam penetrated the darkness and caught something that made her scream. Bones. A skull. And wrapped around the skeletal remains, a UT student ID card, faded but still readable. Rebecca Hartley. Sarah stumbled backwards, dropping her flashlight. She scrambled out of the closet and ran to her apartment, locking every lock and pushing furniture against the door. She called the police, hysterical, barely able to form coherent sentences. When they arrived, they found exactly what Sarah described: Rebecca Hartley's remains hidden behind a false wall in what used to be room 7. The subsequent investigation revealed that the original police search in 1979 had been sloppy. They'd assumed Rebecca had been killed elsewhere and never properly searched the building. The boarding house owner at the time, a man who died in 1985, became the prime suspect. They found evidence that he'd constructed the false wall the same week Rebecca disappeared. After they removed Rebecca's remains and gave her a proper burial, the phone calls stopped. Sarah lived in that apartment for another 6 months before moving, unable to shake the feeling that something had been trying to reach out all along, not to scare her, but to be found, to finally rest. The storage closet is still there, now just an empty space. But sometimes tenants still report their phones ringing at 12:47 a.m. And when they answer, they hear only silence, the grateful kind. 2 down, 1 to go. And trust me, the final story is the one that still keeps me up at night. Stay with me.
Story 3. The Thing Beneath Marfa. In far west Texas, where the land stretches endlessly flat under a sky so vast it makes you feel insignificant, there's a small town called Marfa, population barely 3,000. Most people know it for the mysterious Marfa lights, those unexplained orbs that dance across the desert at night. Tourists flock there with cameras and theories. Artists love it for the solitude and strange energy. Most consider it a quirky, charming place where creative souls find inspiration. But the locals, the ones whose families have been there for generations, know something the visitors don't. The lights aren't the only mystery in Marfa. They know about old stories, whispered in dive bars after too many drinks, about things that move beneath the desert floor, about mine shafts sealed for reasons that had nothing to do with safety,
about expedition teams that went into the wilderness and never came back, their disappearances explained away with convenient lies. The locals know that in a place as empty and ancient as the West Texas desert, the silence isn't really silent at all. If you listen carefully, you can hear things moving in that emptiness. Things that were old when the first humans crossed into North America. Things that sleep in the deep places, waiting with the patience of stone. James Rivera was a geologist, 43 years old, with 20 years of experience exploring caves and mine shafts across the American Southwest. The earth didn't scare him. He understood it, respected it, and knew how to read its secrets. When a private mining company contracted him in March 2021 to survey a site about 15 miles outside Marfa, he saw it as just another job. They detected unusual mineral signatures and wanted him to assess whether the site was worth developing. James loaded his truck with equipment and drove out from El Paso on a Tuesday morning. By the time he reached the coordinates, it was mid-afternoon, and the sun was turning the desert into a blast furnace. The site was marked by an old, collapsed mine entrance, barely visible beneath decades of erosion. He set up camp 50 yards from the mine and spent that first evening watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. It was peaceful, perfect even, but there was something else too, something he couldn't quite name, a feeling that made the hair on his arms stand up despite the lingering heat, like he was being watched, though there was nothing out there but rocks and empty space. He slept fitfully that first night, waking several times to strange sounds, scraping noises that might have been wind-blown debris or might have been something else. The next morning, James used ground-penetrating radar to map what lay below. The readings were immediately strange, a massive cavern system extending deep into the earth, far deeper than any natural cave formation should exist in this geology. Even more curious were regular structures the radar detected, geometric shapes arranged in patterns that suggested intentional design. His scientific mind raced with possibilities. This could be a discovery that would rewrite history. On his second day, James decided to descend into the collapsed mine. It took him 4 hours of hard work to clear enough debris to create a safe passage. The dark opening yawned before him like a mouth, cool air flowing out with a smell that was wrong. Not the earthy smell of natural caves, but something organic and ancient and faintly rotten. He clicked on his headlamp and entered the tunnel, marking his path with reflective tape as he went. The tunnel sloped downward steadily, 20 yards, 50, 100. The temperature dropped noticeably, his breath beginning to mist. After roughly 200 yards, the tunnel opened into something that stole the breath from his lungs. A cavern. But calling it a cavern was like calling the Grand Canyon a ditch. His headlamp beam simply disappeared into the darkness. The space was that vast. The air was cold enough that he could see his breath in thick clouds, and the smell was stronger now, that organic rot mixed with something chemical and sharp that made his eyes water. Then he saw them, the pillars. Rising from the ground were dozens of stone structures, each about 15 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter. They were arranged in vast concentric circles. At first glance, they looked almost natural, but as James approached the nearest one, he realized they were carved, shaped with tools and intention. The surface was covered with intricate designs, patterns that seemed to writhe and shift in his headlamp beam, geometric shapes that hurt to look at, that made his eyes want to slide away. Looking at them directly gave him an instant headache.
James pulled out his camera and began documenting everything. This was an archaeological discovery of immense importance. These carvings predated anything else in the region. The style didn't match any known Native American art or Spanish colonial work. This was something much, much older. He moved between the pillars, measuring and photographing. His thermometer read 42 degrees, impossibly cold for this depth. The silence was oppressive, broken only by his own breathing and footsteps. Then he noticed the floor between the pillars wasn't natural rock. James knelt down and brushed away dust to reveal worked stone, flagstones fitted together with precision that would have impressed Roman engineers. This entire cavern floor was paved. Someone had built this place. But who and why? Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong underground. Breathing. Slow, deep, rhythmic breathing, like something massive drawing air into enormous lungs. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. James froze, his headlamp sweeping across the cavern floor. The breathing continued, steady and patient. The breathing of something sleeping, something vast. His headlamp found scratches at the base of a pillar, recent ones, the exposed rock still relatively fresh. James approached and knelt beside the markings. Someone had carved words into the stone, English words. His fingers traced the letters. "Do not wake it. Leave now. For the love of God, leave." Marfa Expedition 1954. They're all dead. I'm the last. James' blood turned to ice. The Marfa Expedition. 5 geology students and their professor from the University of Texas had vanished in the desert outside Marfa in spring 1954. A massive search found nothing. The case went cold. The official explanation was exposure and dehydration. But they'd been here. They'd found this place, and something had killed them. Something that was still here, sleeping in the darkness. The breathing grew louder. James rose to his feet, turning slowly. His headlamp swept past the pillars into the deeper darkness. And there, at the edge of his light's reach, he saw movement. Something shifting in the shadows. Something far too large to be natural. James adjusted his headlamp to maximum brightness. The beam pushed further into the darkness, and what it revealed made his mind scream. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. It looked like a spider, but the scale was monumentally wrong. Each leg had to be 30 or 40 feet long, thick as tree trunks, covered in something that resembled stone. The central body was a nightmare tangle of writhing appendages and tentacles. At the center, positioned where a head should be, was something that might have once been called a face. Multiple eyes, far too many, arranged in patterns that created impossible geometries. Some were half open, glowing with sickly green bioluminescence, and the mouth was ringed with mandibles that looked like they could crush stone and pulverize bone. The skin seemed to shift and flow like liquid stone, as if the thing had been sleeping so long it had started merging with the bedrock itself, becoming part of the earth. James understood with absolute terror what this place was. The pillars weren't a temple, they were a prison. A cage built in an age before history to contain something that should never walk the earth. The patterns weren't art, they were wards, seals, locks on a door never meant to be opened. The breathing changed, became faster, louder. Those terrible eyes were opening wider, the green glow intensifying. The creature was waking up. James had disturbed it. He had to leave, right now. James turned and ran. Pure animal panic took over. Behind him, the creature moved. Stone grinding on stone, wet organic sounds, and worst of all, a sound that might have been a voice. Not words, but a sound that communicated hunger and rage. James sprinted between the pillars, his headlamp bouncing wildly. He could hear those enormous legs striking the cavern floor, each impact sending vibrations through the stone. The creature was impossibly fast.
One of its legs slammed into the ground beside him, missing by inches. The impact cracked the ancient flagstones, sending shards flying. One piece caught James across the cheek, opening a gash that began streaming blood. He didn't feel it, just kept running. The creature screamed, a sound that was a physical force. James felt it in his chest, felt his heart stutter. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then his body remembered how to function, and he lurched forward again. 10 yards to the tunnel. 5. James threw himself through the opening, his headlamp shattering and plunging him into darkness, broken only by that green glow. The creature tried to follow. James heard stone cracking as it forced its way into the tunnel, widening the passage through sheer force. He ran blindly, his hands scraping against the walls to guide himself. Light appeared ahead. Daylight. James pushed himself harder, drawing on reserves he didn't know he had. He burst out into the desert afternoon, stumbled, fell, got up, and kept running. Behind him, the hillside shook. The tunnel collapsed with a roar of falling stone and billowing dust. James reached his truck, threw himself in, and started the engine with trembling hands. Only when he was 5 miles away did he look back. The hillside was still visible, and even from this distance, he could see the ground shifting, bulging upward as something beneath tried to force its way to the surface. James drove for hours until he reached El Paso. He checked into a motel and spent 3 days barely eating or sleeping. When he did sleep, he dreamed of those eyes, too many eyes, glowing green in the darkness. On the 4th day, he filed his report, marking the site as geologically unstable and extremely dangerous. He didn't mention what he'd really seen. But 3 months later, James read a news article. Unusual seismic activity reported near Marfa, Texas. Small earthquakes, dozens of them. The epicenter was exactly where he'd been. He checked the seismograph readings online. The pattern of tremors wasn't random. They were rhythmic, like breathing, and they were getting stronger. James doesn't sleep well anymore. He dreams of that cavern, of watching something impossible wake from ancient slumber. Sometimes the creature speaks to him in images that leave him gasping awake. It shows him what will happen when it breaks free. Cities falling, mountains crumbling, the earth cracking open. He keeps a news alert for Marfa, checking it daily with dread and compulsion. He's waiting for the headline he knows will come, because James knows the truth he can never tell anyone. The pillars are failing, the prison is breaking, and when it finally gives way, when that thing beneath Marfa tears its way to the surface, the world will learn that some ancient things were locked away for a reason. The breathing in the earth continues, steady and patient. Each tremor is another crack in the walls of its cell, another step closer to freedom. And James Rivera, the man who rattled the cage, lives with the knowledge that he might have doomed them all, that his curiosity might have been the key that unlocked a door meant to stay closed forever. Late at night, James sometimes feels it, a vibration that travels through the ground, up through the foundation, into his bones, the breathing of something vast and terrible, counting down the days until its prison fails completely. And when that day comes, Marfa won't be known for its mysterious lights anymore. It'll be known as the place where something ancient and hungry broke free from its chains. The place where humanity learned we are not, and have never been, alone on this planet. That we share it with older things, things that ruled before us, things that will rule after we're gone. The desert keeps its secrets well, but not forever. Nothing lasts forever. Not stone, not wards, not prisons built by forgotten hands. And the thing beneath Marfa waits for its chance, patient as the stone it resembles, waiting for the walls to crumble just a little bit more, waiting to reclaim a world it once walked freely before something locked it away in the darkness. James Rivera knows this, and the knowledge is slowly driving him mad. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which story scared you most, and subscribe for more tales from the dark corners of America.